Hello, my name is Emily Phillips Frazier, and I'm here to give you a historical timeline on 10 events that shaped the education of English language learners. These events will either be pieces of state or federal legislation or Supreme Court cases. In this presentation, I will be referring to English language learners as ELLs. With that being said, let's get started with our first event. Our first event is a Supreme Court case of Mayer versus Nebraska in the year 1923. This also happens to be the year that my university, Texas Tech University, was founded. So there's that. With that being said, let's move on to the case. Robert T. Mayer was teaching German to a fourth grader in Nebraska. When an attorney walked in and found him teaching this foreign language, he was charged with violating the Simon Act, which was a 1919 law restricting teaching a foreign language or using it as a medium of instruction. Well, needless to say, Robert T. Mayer was not very happy, so he appealed and took this case all the way to the Supreme Court. In the end, he ended up winning, and the Supreme Court overturned the 1919 law, or the Simon Act. This established the state's authority to determine the language of instruction in the public school system. In turn, this led to English language learners, or ELLs, being able to learn in their own schools in their native language because can now be used as a medium of instruction. The second event is also a court case. It is Brown versus the Board of Education in the year 1954. This is a very famous case that everyone knows, desegregated white or black schools. Well, a little background is this took place in Topeka, Kansas, and the daughter of an African-American man named Oliver Brown was forced to be bused over an hour away to her all-black school, even though she lived next door to an all-white school. Well, Oliver Brown was not very happy, and he went to the Supreme Court case. And this Supreme Court case overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, which was supposed to be separate but equal, and the judge said separate does not mean equal. So it desegregated schools, and it allowed for ELLs to be immersed in their general education and said that they cannot be completely segregated from other students throughout their education just because of their race or nationality. Our third event is the Bilingual Education Act of 1968. Now, this is a big one in terms for ELLs. It's provided federal support for bilingual programs for ELLs and their families. It is also known as Title VII of Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. This is the first federal legislation to focus on needs of English language learners. It provided funding to schools for bilingual programs. It also set the bar for further legislation to be put in place. The Bilingual Education Act of 1968 has been amended many times since the year it was put in place, partially due to my next slide, which is Lau versus Nichols in the year 1974. Lau versus Nichols of 1974 took place in San Francisco, California. The basis of it was Chinese American students were put in general education classes despite their limited knowledge of English or how long they had been in the country. They were basically left to quote unquote sink or swim. The school district said that it is equal and fair treatment to the Chinese American students because they have access to the same materials and are treated the same as normal students. The judge for the Supreme Court disagreed and stated that equal treatment does not equal just giving ELLs the same materials and textbooks as normal students. After this case was determined, it led to the Lau remedies. This was put in place by the Office of Civil Rights within the U.S. Department of Education. The Lau remedies went after inadequate school districts, practically ignoring the needs of ELLs. The Lau remedies led to equal treatment for English language learners and to the Equal Education Opportunities Act of 1974, which just so happens to be my next slide. The Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974, which is still in effect today, is the allow remedies practically put into federal legislation. Section 1703F of the Equal Educational Opportunities Act states that no state shall deny educational opportunities to an individual on account of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin. But for the purpose of ELLs, we are focusing on race and national origin. This includes the failure of an educational agency to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by its students in its instructional programs. That is a quote taken directly from Foundations for Teaching English Language Learners, Research, Theory, Policy, and Practice by Wayne E. Wright. The Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974 inspired several pieces of legislation further. And although things were looking up for ELLs in 1974, my next slide, the 1981 case of Castaneda versus Picard, made advancements for ELLs in Texas take a hard left turn. In Castaneda versus Picard in 1981, the court case found that Raymondville School District was inadequate in the needs of bilingual education, but it did not meet the demands of Castaneda for bilingual education. However, a positive outcome is the Castaneda standard, which is a three-pronged test to determine the adequacy for ELL and bilingual programs in school districts. It is a three-pronged test that determines a school's district and became the basis for all states' ELL programs. The three prongs of the test were ELL programs must be 1, based on a sound educational theory, 2, implemented effectively with sufficient resources and personnel, and 3, evaluated to determine whether they are effective in helping students overcome language barriers. Although the standard became the basis of adequacy, like I said, for all schools, the test itself had some shortcomings. The first and second prongs were easily accomplished through educational theory and required little effort or money on the school's behalf. The third prong requires a waiting period, and this means that students may be harmed by an inadequate program before it is fixed by the Castaneda standard. My next slide happens to come just a little later. It is the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. It was put in place by the George W. Bush administration. It only lasted until the year 2016, and it emphasized high-stakes testing in English language arts, science, and math. For ELLs specifically, they were expected to perform well on the same tests with high emphasis on them, regardless of their level of proficiency in English or how long they had been in the country. This had some negative results. It led to the test curriculum and discouraged bilingual education. It had unrealistic educational expectations for ELLs. Right before the No Child Left Behind Act was dismantled in 2016, the Obama administration enacted the law of Every Student Succeeds Act, and it is still in effect today. Basically, the Every Student Succeeds Act had the same standards as No Child Left Behind, but held greater flexibility within states' rights. The Every Student Succeeds Act has 3 titles that focus on disadvantaged bilingual and immigrant students. They provide all children equal opportunities to receive high-quality education despite economic gaps. The second title is more flexible but still focuses on state assessments, and the third title requires that ELLs are in language instruction classes. Now, these last 2 slides are the most recent, both taking place in the year 2017. The English Learner Roadmap, or Proposition 58, took place in July 2017 and was a piece of California legislation that removed old regulations and said that online systems will change the entire curriculum and standards used to instruct ELLs. It was informed by Proposition 58, which said that public schools were to teach ELLs through various bilingual programs. These were mainly online. The last major event that I'll be talking about is Bill H. 4032, or the Baker Bill, which took place in November 2017. This stated that schools can choose different ways to teach their bilingual students, as not every program works for every student. This said that schools can put a seal of biliteracy on their ELL's diploma, stating that they are proficient in more than one language. This will look good on resumes and college applications. It also said that parent committees can come up and help their students after school to help their ELLs in clubs and such. That is my presentation and my historical timeline on major events that affected ELL education. If you would like to know more, you may follow these two websites or my textbook that I stated earlier by Wayne E. Wright, Foundations for Teaching English Language Learners, Research, Theory, Policy, and Practice. Thank you.